Hello, hello. It is time for Real Talk with Tia and Jill. Once again, we are so happy to have you here with us. And as you can see, I have a guest with us, but we don't have Tia with us. So I am so happy to announce that Tia had her baby on Sunday morning. So Tiana is their new baby girl, and mom, dad, baby, and family are doing fantastic. And over the next few weeks, Tia and family will be adjusting to what it's like having a new baby in the house. And so we hope to have Tia back with us soon. But until then, we are going to carry forward. So, if you've joined us before, you know that we like to start with hearing from you and understanding where you're joining us from and if you are live or on the replay. Because if no matter where you're from and what comments you have, we're certainly going to circle back and make sure we get to each and every one, if it's during our broadcast today or even after. So please make sure to put those in there, and I'll make sure that we check them periodically. So if it is your first time joining us, we are your go-to team for food safety and quality leadership and culture. Our love, Tia and I, we just love helping technical leaders succeed and really step in to being the full leader that they can be. And we know that being a strong leader, whether you have the title or not, involves really helping technical teams that are interwoven and connected through the organization. And that really serves as the foundation of food safety culture. And we love to see when that magic happens. And if you've been with us, you know the reason we love doing this is because we've been there. We have felt those challenges and we felt those wins that come from learning and growing as technical leaders. And most importantly, we believe and we know that you can make a difference. And so we love helping you along that journey because we know it can be tough, but it's so rewarding. So, through our weekly LinkedIn Live show that is at noon Eastern on Wednesdays, we talk all about that. This month, we are in the midst of a 4-week series related to onboarding team members. Woo! Can you believe it? I know we're just getting through because I'm so excited to be able to introduce Veronica in just a moment. But we want to talk about onboarding all month because when we're in technical roles and leader roles, really those are any type of role. The bottom line is all about how do we set people up for success. And we are just so honored to have insights this month from seasoned leaders to new graduates to help us understand how do we do that better. And so hopefully during the next 4 weeks, this gives you a chance to sit back and consider what is it that you're looking for to have that next level of success? And even as you kind of look around and see others in this space with you, what things can we do to help set them up for success? So before we dive in too far, I just want to welcome, we have a few people joining us from Canada and Brooklyn and Phoenix. Hello to all of you. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Please be sure to put comments in and we will be checking those as we go forward. So now that I've done all the intro, I am so excited to introduce Veronica Hislop of FoodGrads today. Welcome, Veronica, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you so much, Jill. I'm excited to be invited on the show. It's really cool, the type of stuff you're doing and promoting this culture of food safety that I think is definitely needed.
Well, thank you. That's our goal. And so we're so happy to have you here to share a whole different perspective that our audience may or may not be aware of. So before we even dive in, for those who don't know you, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and how you found the food industry?
Yeah. So hello, everyone. So I am actually a PhD candidate recently, which is a nice transition, excited to say. Yeah, so in terms of that, so my name is Veronica, and I found the food industry to To be honest, when I was in high school, I actually did want to go into something like research and development. And I considered something like that. But then when I went into high school, I went into the Ryerson chemistry program. And again, I had product development in the back of my mind. And through networking with my boyfriend's mother's boss's cousin, I got my first co-op position.
That's a wonderful web right there.
It's how it works. So make sure, you network. And that's where I got my first role for my co-op program, working at a dairy company in their quality control department. So it was doing standard type of, so it was at their butter factory, which ties in nicely with what my thesis studies. But so I would do line checks and such, making sure the quality checks were okay with the whipped creams and such. And then I transitioned to that co-op program into the R&D at the same company. And after that period, I knew I still wanted to stay into the food industry. I really liked it. I loved the manufacturing. But I realized that in Canada, particularly where I am, as a school that didn't really focus on food safety, chemistry, product development, I started getting involved, and that's where I came across FoodGrads. So I noticed Nicole Galachi, who is the founder of FoodGrads. We became good friends, and she became a mentor, but we realized that there was a gap between the industry and new graduates. So for example, when I was trying to look into what does a QC do, what does R&D do, there wasn't really a lot of resources, especially for someone who wasn't directly in a food science program. So I started off as a campus ambassador. I would create these little job profiles that were based off of job descriptions because there really wasn't that much out there. And this grew the blog, which eventually became our ebook, which is Career Paths in Food and Beverage. But so during that time, I graduated, and then I went into a quality assurance role at a snack company for peanuts. And that's where I was exposed to a full-time role and what quality assurance does, which in that role, because it was a smaller company, it was both QC, QA, and anyone who's in a small company knows that it's basically everything at the same time. So I stayed there for a year, but I couldn't get rid of the itch of wanting to do research. So I decided to go back to school and get my master's to now PhD. And throughout that time, I've been working with FoodGrads, helping identify those gaps from that student perspective. And one other thing to mention is about a year ago, we started the FoodGrads podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to connecting industry, lost my train of thought. I should know what my own podcast does.
That's what happens.
It's to raise awareness to jobs that are in the food and beverage industry, not just in food safety, but across production, skilled trades, and really bring in awareness because we need to have more voices highlighting this type of industry. So that's where I am now.
Well, and that's fascinating. So, because you said this all started really back when you were doing chemistry and looking at product development. So, what was kind of the missing pieces you kind of describe as like just the awareness around different roles in food, which led to the blogs, which led to the ebook. So as you've been working on in this space and helping bring some of this awareness, like what have you noticed? What have people talked about it?
Well, for me, one of the things I noticed was just how many more roles there were that I didn't even know existed particularly. So our research and development I felt was very tangible. But as I started to do these blog posts, I realized, there's a HACCP coordinator. And that's different than a Q. Of course, again, this depends on the size of the company, as everyone would be aware. But there's HACCP coordinators, there's quality control, there's bio. They're just very more specialized roles that I just never even considered exist. And as well, just that network of how our food systems are protected. Like of course, I know there was regulations in that, but coming from high school, I had absolutely no idea. The closest I knew was in like in a restaurant, you're very familiar with food handling and that, but you get the product on the shelf and it's like, oh, there's so much more to it. So just there's a lot more roles I never knew existed.
Well, I think it's fascinating because as I've been listening to Food God podcasts, one of the things that I love is that not only do you do some of the technical roles, but I mean, anything related to food. So there's sales, there's marketing, there's food safety, there's product development. It's really about bringing these other voices and showcasing different careers, which I think is really amazing. Because in our prep meeting, we had talked about like who has been like in high school or some other time been like food safety. That's what I'm doing. I have yet to find someone who's raising their hand early on saying, this is what I want to do. Have you encountered anybody doing that?
The closest I got, and I know it's not even close, is occupational health and safety. No, it's not food safety, but it's maybe somewhere in that realm. But that is the closest I've ever gotten.
All right. And so all these people are missing out on how fun food safety is. And even knowing about it. So I love that, I think it's really amazing that you started this podcast to help bring some of this awareness and give people some different insights about what type of roles are all available out in food. Mm-hmm. So even as you've been working on the podcast, have there been any common themes around, working in the food industry that come through from your guests?
The things that come out, there's probably two things that stand out the most to me. The first of all is everyone knows everyone. I don't know, maybe. So that's one thing that I've come is that it's very much a community, which I never would have thought of prior because we see different companies and we just think, oh, this is an individualized company. Like they don't relate, but a lot of people move around. Another thing that I have also noticed is many people didn't expect to go into where they were. So a podcast episode that should be releasing soon, one of the guests actually went to Sheridan College for being an illustrator, but realized they didn't want to be a starving artist. And a conversation that they were a personal trainer. They mentioned food science, and now they're a big director in food safety. So a lot of people didn't realize the roles, and they did a lot of lateral transitions. So start with the QC, but then someone gets interested in auditing. So then they there. So I guess it's more so just the potential career growth. I think that is something that I've really come in community. That is something I don't that's addressed a lot.
And those are really valuable insights because especially in food safety, one of the things that we hear a lot is sometimes we feel like we're on an island. So I think it's really kind of nice to reinforce and reconnect with, no, there's an entire community out here. And whether we're directly in food safety or not, we have all of these ties together, don't we?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think it's even having something like seeing all these comments on the side, like just seeing this type of talk that we're having. I mean, that's one of the fails of doing a podcast is just very much numbers, but having this live talk back and forth, I can see there's people involved and they're interested in improving the food safety at their plants.
Yeah, I know. And thank you for mentioning that because hi, Ashley down in Texas and Carmen over in Nebraska. Chelsea, it's always nice to see you. And Rima, it's great to have you with us. We always like to involve our audience as well. And, even if you want to drop in, like, what are some of the things that you love about being in the food industry or that have surprised you about being in food? Because those, I think, are the things that, how do we as a community work around messaging and what channels do we use for messaging so that we really can help encourage people to come into this field and see like all the cool things that we do?
Well, one thing I could say is as individuals are writing in the comments of something that I had noticed when I was a student. So I did start my undergraduate degree scarily. I'm young, so I feel like it's all for me to be saying this, but I started it 9 years ago. And I never once was introduced, if it wasn't for my own research, to food safety. And I was always, or food industry, because we'd always have at our university these drop-in sessions where they would get people from research in like organometallics and biomedical, a lot of biomedical, pharmaceutical, but no one ever showed up on food. And I think that's a missed opportunity, especially when it's the first year university students who might have gone into chemistry because they didn't know what they wanted to do. There's a missed opportunity for just discussion to talk to individuals.
That's a really good point. Makes me think about if the food industry, like food manufacturing, had a TV series or some series, like what would the name be and what would be compelling enough to have the general public want to watch it and want to join in?
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has any thoughts on that, once again, drop them in the comments because that would be really interesting to know. So, Veronica, I love that you bring this perspective of, kind of some of these parts that we really have some opportunities to help people understand what is food safety and just being in food and moving in this direction. But I know one of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about was some of the onboarding, because you've mentioned you've done some work in the food industry and you're also doing some research, and so you've had these unique opportunities to kind of experience both. And I'm curious if you would share a little bit about some of the, introductions that you've had as you've gone into industry and what that's been like for you.
Yeah, so I really have only worked at 2 food companies, very different experiences. So the first one would have been when I was doing my co-op experience, and the other one would have been when I was going full-time. And they were very much night and day when it came to the onboarding process. So the first company I worked at for my co-op, it was a large facility, multiple locations, and the onboarding experience was honestly amazing. One of the things, my memory is a little fuzzy, but I do remember very concretely is that they had these packets for me. And they said, these are the things that are going to have each week. So for example, I'd never heard of HACCP before at that point. So they had a little booklet about of what is HACCP, and there was checklists that I would go through. Okay, so for the next week, before you can be working on your own, you're going to be going through this, this, and this. We're going to work with you. And it was just these packets that I could take home. And they had so much care taken into them that I felt, okay, this is what I'm learning. I know what I'm getting myself into. Of course, because when you've never been in a manufacturing facility, it is very overwhelming because the biggest you've probably got is an auditorium for a stage performance, but nothing to this scale, and everything loud, and there's so much going on. So that was my first onboarding experience. And I really had a nice person. One of my coworkers walked me through everything. It was easy to ask questions. I followed her for a week, did our line checks with her, and it was very good. When it came to my second experience, when I was doing my full-time position in QA, I will say that there was no onboarding process whatsoever, and I was really thrown to the wolves. And of course, my manager was there, and I could ask questions, but it was a small facility. The QA department was at the time 3 people, and both people had left at the same time. So it was really hard for them to take the time, and they didn't have packets, and they didn't have this. So my onboarding experience, me basically asking my manager questions for 2 weeks straight, and that was all I could really go for. Of course, there was the SOP I could follow through, but as someone who is more a visual learner, that was something I really appreciated from the first onboarding. SOPs for me don't take me very far sometimes. If it's something like doing a lab test, SOPs are perfect. But when it comes to actually being in the facility, I just found it difficult to get into the rhythm of line checks and little things that might have been missed in the SOP. And then as time went on, sometimes I didn't know what I didn't know, where it was a little more clear the first time.
Wow. And what you described, if I'm understanding correctly, it's almost like you had both ends of the spectrum. One where there was some time taken, and we don't know maybe how much time, but some type of plan to kind of welcome you and kind of set a course for you as you started, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about these packets. How was that partnered or maybe not partnered with some of the like with people? Like how did you connect with people during that onboarding experience versus the second one that you described where you were thrown to the wolves?
Well, in the first instance, because I had a lot more time to go around with the other QC technician who was there, because I had the packets as well, I could bring them around the facility and I could write notes that directly related to this. And then I knew I could make the connection. And I was introduced to everyone. And I'm not to say in the second onboarding I wasn't, because I was introduced to each of the staff, but it was really about me taking on the responsibility to building those connections with the warehouse staff, for example. You know, we met once, but then I had to initiate the conversations, because having a better workplace, I find my experience having a level of sociability with who I worked with helped me, because I am someone who has difficulties asking questions if I'm not comfortable with who I'm talking with. But if I build that relationship, so I felt the first situation really allowed me to get more connected with them, so then I could better talk to the machine operators, talk to this. Well, the second time, there was a bit of like a roadblock, because I had to not only have the social interaction, but then as well, the additionally build on the knowledge of the QC role, or QA, I should say.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. So so it's interesting that you said, you know, in both situations, right, relationships started being built, but perhaps that foundational piece was a little bit different in the roles. What did you notice even as you were in roles longer? Like, how did that play out for maybe how comfortable you were, or like how you felt success, or what did that look like?
Well, in both roles, I mean, there is definitely a difference between being a co-op student and being a full-time worker in terms of how you're viewed and your responsibilities.
True.
When I was in the newer role, so when I was the new graduate in the role, I know there's always, you know, you're coming into a new role. You won't know, even if you are well trained, there's going to be nuances between companies. But the foundation of food safety, again, because I came from a chemistry background, I didn't have a food I didn't have a food background in the sense of the more technical roles. So I really had to lean in onto who I was talking to. And sometimes it would be hard to know how I don't want to say power balance, because I feel like that's an odd word, but that I'm kind of coming from, because if I didn't have the knowledge, it was, who do I fall back on? Should I fully listen to the operator in this condition, or should I be listening? Of course, I would directly always pick my manager in the end, but sometimes if they weren't there, it was knowing the authority. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but.
Well, it sounds like with those, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's, you know, as you're building those relationships, it's also navigating kind of, do we have this same shared purpose, and how much do I trust you to be able to help me navigate when I have questions, and can we solve these things together? And
I think that's a much better way of putting it.
Well, but you know, we keep talking about food safety culture and how, you know, how we work better, right, when we collaborate versus being in silos. And so what I hear from you is, you know, it really makes a difference, or it can make a difference, depending on how those relationships are first even introduced and how you build those from the start. Is that on track with what you experienced?
I definitely think so. Someone who was new to the industry, it was my first job, essentially. It was my first full-time role, and that alone can be very overwhelming to navigate. And it's just because food safety is a different role than going and becoming a packaging line operator. Mm-hmm. There's a level of responsibility as well, that the food comes out safe and you're that first eye, and it's figuring out how do you take responsibility, not necessarily lead, but you are leading as someone in food safety, but it's finding your place with everyone while ensuring you're doing the job correctly and making sure everything is safe.
Yeah, and that's that phrase that you just used, like finding your place. When you talk about finding your place in this role, what does that mean to you?
For me, it was, how do I have, it's hard, again, it's hard to articulate what I'm trying to say, because you want to be a good relationship with other individuals, but you also have to have boundaries in the sense of, this is how it has to be. And you're almost in a somewhat of an I don't want to say authoritative, but you are in a position of, you kind of can dictate how something can go.
It's a lot of responsibility.
If you're the QC or QA and you see something going on wrong in the line, you want to stop it. But it can be odd if you're trying to figure out your relationship. And it was something I struggled with a lot when I first started my role. And of course, at the end of the day, I made sure that the food was safe and those types of things. But how do I communicate this to others was really hard for me. So,
and that's interesting, because once again, going back to food safety culture, when we talk about, just the clarity in expectations, and are we all on the same page? Because at the end of the day, I truly believe that we all want to make safe food. It's just that sometimes we don't know what we don't know, or we maybe don't understand the nuances of something that actually have a bigger implication and maybe are a bigger problem. And so how do we help people know, like, we're all in this together, and finding our place means we're all moving with the same intent and with that same purpose to have safe food. So it actually makes me think about when you talked about, so I don't want to say pick on company too, but being thrown to the wolves gives a really good visual for people. And when I've talked with people in food safety, it seems like we probably experience more being thrown to the wolves or the drinking from a fire hose. And sometimes we look at what one or two things can help alleviate some of that pressure of being thrown to the wolves. And so even as you compare those two experiences and think about, like, what small steps could have made that second experience so much richer and such a better starting place, what would you recommend?
Well, one thing I do want to preface with all that is, although I do say thrown to the wolves, I will say my manager was excellent, and the production staff. When I say thrown to the wolves, it was more so from the status of preparation. I don't mean that they were saying, go figure it out totally, no, it was, my manager was very good. He led me. Moment's notice, if I was on the afternoon shift, you can phone me, you can text me, you can ask the production staff. So it wasn't as bad as
you were totally alone.
No, I was definitely not fully alone. It was more so, it was coming from the perspective of preparation, and there was no preparation or onboarding at all. And where I met. So I think one of the things that would have made a difference is, I always think back, and I started to try to implement that when I was in that role as well, as creating these onboard packages, was, I think, having just something to prepare the individual for the first week, saying, we're going to get you through the steps. And by having a checklist, I guess you could say, if they had maybe a checklist saying, we're going to teach you HACCP this week. You go on my own and go look at HACCP if I had a little time. Having those like books also could be as my notebook, and I could add on to that. So I think the key would be, have a little preparation, because it makes you feel a little more cared for. I know it's difficult with smaller companies. I recognize that I was in a small company, but just having some kind of information guide that is besides the SOPs, because when to the role, if we're coming from a new graduate perspective, SOPs are just, it's a little overwhelming. So having something more digestible and would be nice. A digestible checklist, I would almost suggest.
A digestible checklist. I like that, because you're right. Sometimes, right, we have the whole binder, like here are all the SOPs, boom, whether it's, a binder or electronic. But right, sometimes that's just a moment for like the sleep to settle in, because that's just a lot of reading without being able to apply and the context to where it fits. So,
yeah.
But I love how you talked about, right, just that little bit of prep that shows that you care can go a long way. So even as you think about like, how did that even perhaps maybe impact you or influence you, as even with the overall like company and what you thought of it when you started?
Well, again, coming into a new role straight out of university, it's very overwhelming to begin with. It doesn't matter if any role, to be honest, and even if you work well prepared. But if something is disorganized when you first come in, it can almost be a signal to suggest that things might not get any better later on, because it feels, I'm going to be a member of your team, but if you haven't prepped now, what's it going to be like later on, when I'm new? So that's what I've heard as well from like other students as well. Just it can be hard. So it can be a bad signal when it doesn't have to be in the end. Even though the company isn't like that, they just have the time to do the onboarding, but everything else is okay. It can be a missed signal.
True. And since we know that's such a critical part, right? Like it's our first day and we're so excited and we show up, and like that handoff moment, kind of like transition point, what it looks like. So on an organization side, like you said, perhaps just a digestible checklist, something that gives a little bit of direction and shows we care and thought about you're joining us, and how can we make this transition a little bit easier so you can get to know us, right?
Yeah, that would be really nice.
Nice. So even as you think about moving from I'm going to say kind of academia or school into a role, even just from a personal standpoint, like what do you think is helpful to even consider or bring forth as you're coming into a new role and kind of preparing? Because like you said, you may have an experience where someone has the packets and has the checklist, but you may also have an experience where you come in and it's kind of each day you're maybe getting direction. So how do you prepare for that coming into that as a new grad?
So just to clarify, you're asking like as a new graduate, what would I think would be a better idea as someone in my responsibility role do to ease my own like onboarding, so to say?
Yeah, exactly. Because out here with the companies, you're not really sure kind of what it will be like when you get there. So what would it look like for your own type of preparation, or what would you recommend for others moving into that to be ready?
I think one of the things I would do now, thinking about it, is just get more, maybe, again, things might have been very different because of graduating, but maybe I would suggest listening into conversations even like this, hearing what, I'm always someone who loves listening to podcasts, watching videos, and I likely didn't do that because I was into doing FoodGrads, so I didn't feel the need, but maybe I would have suggested now listening to some technical podcasts or something like a Food Safety Matters podcast. I think that's the one. And hearing about the day-to-day, kind of the nitty-gritty about the things that do actually happen, because at least I can start to be familiar with it. Because again, I fall back to, I went to a chemistry degree, and I think a lot of people can agree that safety has a lot of different oncoming backgrounds coming in. So biology, chemistry, sometimes degrees on quality assurance, sometimes college diplomas. And if the footing's not all the same, maybe I also would have considered getting a certification prior to graduating if I that's something I hear a lot in the podcast suggestions to new graduates is if you are planning to go to food safety, to get a certification. So maybe that would have been something I would have considered. But I think getting to know the technical side prior to entering, at least so when I hear the new terms and that it's not as like startling, so to say.
Well, and really so many companies have their own jargon, right? It's like learning a new language. And so on top of that, you throw in all of these acronyms and whoo, that's a lot.
And as well, also learning about each company's specific processing conditions. Because, even school does not prepare you for the intricacies of snack manufacturing and stuff like that. And you have to know this company does it this way. And so you have to get used to their process. You have to get used to their way of doing things. And yeah.
No, right. And that's, a great reminder, because the food industry, we're so complex, even though my husband's an engineer, and he always says, we don't just make gadgets or widgets. The things that we make and with the raw materials, it doesn't mean that everything's getting stamped out exactly the same. And so because of that, we have so many different twists on a process. It's one company running this line is not going to be the same as another one over here, even if we're making the same product. So, I think that's, and that's some wonderful advice, because, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I've heard that from other sources as well, that sometimes going out, or when you're looking for new roles, if you are able to have one of the food safety certifications prior, sometimes that gives you a little bit more insight or helps you be more prepared going into those roles. And sometimes at like a university level, they may even offer those through their program or an extension, so that it's a little bit more accessible to be able to do that. So,
and I might want to overtake the show and something that I do want to maybe put out there for who's listening, because as I mentioned, I do the FoodGrads podcast, and the podcast is directed to students and new graduates. I'd love to know, if anyone's listening, what you think that new graduates you would like to see coming out of, for us to know, because we just might not know, because we don't have someone to talk to. So if you could suggest something, I would love to put that out there as well.
Oh yeah, and that's awesome, because that's really kind of that's what I love about having you here, because with FoodGrads, it's all about how do we prepare people to come into food and know what's available to them. All right, and that's what we're looking to do too. How do we help set people up for success in food when we're going in to this industry and into these different roles? So yeah, if there's someone out there who's like, I've got something that would be really cool, drop it in there so that we can share that with Veronica.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at when there's someone had posted a suggestion with HR's measuring onboarding experiences, and I think that would be really interesting as well.
And that would be cool. Yes. And Chelsea, I love that you have, right, no day is the same in food safety. We get to taste and make lots of cool products. Absolutely. If people knew how fun that could be, there may be a little bit more interest in coming into food.
Wow, that was that is a really good key. That was something I discovered when I was in my role, it was not the same as I come in thinking it would be, and it was definitely not.
Right. So even just having a realistic expectation really helps people transition easier into roles. Like, I know this is what the role's about. I know what to expect when I come in. Ashley, I love that you've shared, as we talk about how do we get more information out there about food, social media, right? Love it or hate it. It can help move things forward with accurate information, but it can also put inaccurate information out in front of a lot of people as well. And so how do we use a tool like that, like you said, to have a positive influence and to help really show and highlight the amazing things that we're all doing every day? So, yeah. Oh, no, thanks. These are great comments coming in about, just, we don't talk a lot about food and understanding how food is made, at least in the US, school curriculum, never really a big part. So, yeah. Yes, the strategic objectives and what are our people's strategy to make them successful. And I think that's that's really what this series in April is all about. Like, how do we help influence so that there is more success as we go into food? Because um, we have such amazing people with passion in food, but we all know that there's also times where we don't have the greatest experiences, and so people leave the food industry. I can't believe it. I don't know why. Um, but how do we keep more people here? Because we do amazing things, and the more we can message that together and make it what we want to be, the more that in itself will attract more people to this industry.
Mhm.
At least that's what I believe.
I
So
believe that too. That's in part where the FoodGrads podcast came to be, because I saw there was a gap in terms of, sharing these voices and such. I mean, there was a level of, like I mentioned, the Food Safety Matters podcast, and the name slipping to me right now. There's the magazine Food Safety. Like, they have their own podcast too.
oh yeah, the Food Safety Matters, the Food Safety
Okay.
Magazine. Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's another one that's thing, and those are great, but they're definitely not an introduction for someone who's kind of, it's a high level for some people who are maybe considering a career there. So.
Yeah, well, and that's a really good point too, because there's so many nuggets of information out there, and so sometimes even how do we help make those visible and have some awareness for people around us, or people that are interested? Because I think as you've shared with us, that onboarding really can give an impression of an organization when you start. And whether that's an accurate one to predict maybe what it will look like in the long run, it still is your first introduction and it still has an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so maybe this is a rhetorical question, but if you had to go like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how critical is intentional support to onboard someone successfully? Where would you rate it?
See, I go between different numbers because I'm of a person that thinks that onboarding helps set you up for success, but then there's also personal responsibility that also has to be taken. And where does the line divide between the two? I know support helps you. I would say a 7. I don't want to say a full 10 either, because I think that there has to be some personal responsibility in taking initiative and learning what you don't, or at least learning what you don't know, but the company should be helping you figure out what you don't know if you don't know it.
And I love that you bring that up because, right, we know that there's so many moving parts. And if we expect everything to be in just like one little package, perfectly here, like just gifted to us, probably not going to happen. And we all have different learning styles. We all have different ways that we like to interact with people. And so it really is for us as well, right? That belief that we can step up and have a voice to say, you know what, here's what I've noticed that helps me be successful when I start something new, and share that. Because that's just as important for your leader or for your team to know, so that it really can meld better together.
And I think it
Yeah.
encourages, well, I don't want to say conformity, but at this time, it can help by having different learning styles like addressed, and that way the person who needed it maybe visually from a video was able to identify it in the same way that someone from a written form could, and there was more of a message that was shared across instead of trying to fill in the pieces yourself.
Oh, yeah, and that's so true. And I already shared like SOPs make me fall asleep. But if we go out on the floor and we talk about how things are working, I personally, I'll remember. And then I can relate it back to the SOP. But as you point out, it's all about that learning style, and everyone's different. So while having intentional support and an onboarding path can be very helpful, I like that personal accountability as well, because we too need to step into that to have the success that we want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I know we wanted to talk about FoodGrads and onboarding. And before, I step away and move into our speed round questions, Was there anything that we haven't talked about or that we maybe covered in our prep meeting that you're like, here's one more thing that I want to make sure we talk about yet today?
Well, I could always do self-promotion in theme with the topic.
Go ahead. We're good with self-promotion because we want people to check out the FoodGrads podcast, right?
And there we go. As I'm a self-promotion in terms of I'm always looking for guests to come on the show and talk about their careers and just how they got to be, and just, again, career voices to show for the industry. So self-promotion, if that's something that does interest you, please reach out to me. But I think that with in theme of everything we've been talking about, I always come back to personal responsibility tied in with leading in. And I just find that onboarding can make you feel supported when sometimes you mentioned that food safety can feel like an island. I very much feel if you can create a strong culture within your own department, this can lead out and bleed out into other areas. So if you know your manager or your coworker has your back, you have a stronger ability to go out for and lead with intention because you know that you're backed up. And I think that onboarding is a first step, just to know someone cares for you, that the departments, we're here together and we're going to make this whole food safety culture like a great thing at the company.
Yeah, I think that's a great message because, it is that personal side. And, we can bring in the business side too, because all of those things help with better engagement, lower retention, quicker decision making, which usually results in less downtime, less product thrown away. All of it is good. And that stems from and can stem from this initial introduction of your team and getting to know the culture and belonging and being on the same page. So amazing. Awesome. All right. Well, we're certainly not going to let you get away without answering our speed round questions because we love being able to get to know you about FoodGrads and about onboarding, but we also want to know a little bit more about you as a person. So are you ready for speed round?
I guess let's go sip water and then we'll be ready.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Well, and hopefully these aren't meant to be too hard. So it's not a quest, not a quiz or anything. But all right. So who's the funniest person you know and why?
I would have to say my partner. He likes to send me a lot of funny videos of his cat. And anything that involves cat humor is usually up there for me.
All right. Cat humor. Got that. All right. Where would you love to go on vacation?
Definitely Japan. It is something that I've been planning. So I'm very much into the Japanese animation, and I find that their country just has so many different. One thing that I find really interesting is they really acknowledge different prefectures and cities, and they have their own special. How do you put it? They really celebrate the city they're in and what they do in that city, and I think that'd be really cool to explore.
Yes. They have rich and deep history and culture.
Yes, very much.
So if you could be a character from a movie or a show or a book, which one would you choose and why?
Okay, so I'm probably going to throw out one no one has absolutely heard of, but that is okay. So again, coming to Japanese animation, there is a show that's very similar to Sailor Moon. It's called Pretty Cure. And there's this character where she is a magical girl, they call it, and she is like a rock star, and I just think it's so cool.
That's awesome. I like it. She's a magical. I like magical's fun, right?
It is. It's nice to be able to snap your fingers and outfit change.
Can you imagine? Wouldn't that be awesome? Or snap your fingers and this is all fixed or whatever, right? So, yes. Which kind of goes into the last question, which is, what would people say is your superpower?
This is a hard one. I'm gonna say hopefully being able to present properly, given that we've been having good conversations. So I'm gonna say be able to have good conversation.
Well, and I can attest to that because I have listened to FoodGrads, and you definitely bring forth some great conversations there. So
Thank you so much.
Veronica, we are so glad that you could join us today. And we really, I'm so grateful to have these this conversation and these just nuggets of wisdom and, ways that we can help really make a difference when it comes to onboarding and helping people feel cared about and ready to jump and to step into these roles. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you to everyone who took the time to come here. I hope that my experiences will be of value to anyone, or maybe a different perspective you might have not seen, because I do love this industry, and I really want it to be highlighted more and just get more people excited about it, and just also have that generation who cares about, like, I want them to know that the products that I'm being fed off the supermarket are safe. So it helps everyone when it goes well.
It does. Yeah. And, we're going to continue talking about onboarding and technical leaders and success next week. So we will be having Annie Ellerman, and she's going to share her amazing journey that led her to be the organizational effectiveness leader for global quality and regulatory at McCormick and Company. And along the way, she has transitioned and helped others transition from being an individual contributor to leading people. And so we're going to talk about how we set people up for success, even as they're transitioning across roles as well. Because we know that the more we talk about the things that have worked for us and the things that maybe we wish would have gone better, as an industry, we can be better together and really showcase the amazing talents that our groups have. So if you have any questions or any messages, please drop those in the comment, and we are happy to connect with you. And we really are, appreciate that each of you spent an hour of your time with us today, or whatever part you had. We appreciate having you here and being part of this conversation today. So with that, I want to thank everyone, and we hope to see you back here next week, Wednesday at noon Eastern, for our next Real Talk Food Safety. So have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.